Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint a fall scene with a football on an 11 by 14 inch canvas with acrylics. I'm going to go over colors and brushes first. So for the brushes, I used a 3/4 flat brush, a number 4 round brush. These are the Princeton Velvet Touch brushes, and the 3 brushes here come in a pack, and this is the 3/8 inch angle brush. I use that to paint the vertical lines in the fence background, but you can use a round brush for that too. I used a 12 bright brush. This is a Royal and Langnickel brush. And of course, you are welcome to use whatever brushes and whatever colors you have available. You can also use this painting on any size canvas. You don't have to do it on 11 by 14. So for the colors, I used 7 colors in this painting. I used Turquoise Blue, Cadmium Orange Hue, Neutral Gray Value 5, Titanium White, Mars Black, Hooker's Green Hue Permanent, and Burnt Sienna. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I have a blank white canvas positioned in the horizontal mode. And I have 3 colors on my palette: Neutral Gray Value 5, Mars Black, and Titanium White. If you don't have Neutral Gray Value 5, you can make a gray. So just do black and white on your palette and make like a light to medium gray. I'm going to start by loading my 3/4 brush in the gray, and then each of the corners gets a white and a black. So I'm going to do vertical strokes. This is going to blend those 3 colors together to make a gray. So the point of this is that we want to create kind of a faux wood background, like a gray fence. And we want to create the different kind of variations in the wood texture just by letting these colors look streaky on the canvas. So it's a super simple way to create this effect. And you're basically just doing up and down strokes throughout the entire canvas area. And you don't want to over blend the colors. You want to just kind of leave them like they're streaking. So some areas will be dark, some will be light. When you go to reload the brush, you're going to grab different amounts of colors. So you can grab a big chunk of white and then a big chunk of gray. You don't want to grab big chunks of black because it will take over super fast, and we don't want the background to be super dark unless you want to do it that way. But I was going for kind of like a medium to light gray wood fence. So just little amounts of black on the brush is all that's needed to create those few darker areas in our gray wood fence. If you find that your paint's not spreading fast or drying too fast, you can load your brush in a little bit of water that helps get it to spread. You just don't want to let it drip down. So be careful with your water loading. So little bits of water, distribute that into the paint, and just keep going. Fill up your entire canvas with this technique. It should be a very thin layer of paint. I'm going to load some more gray. A little bit of water, help get that to spread. And I am going to go silent here for just a bit while I finish up the background. So we'll want to let this dry a little bit, but it doesn't have to be completely dry for this next step. I'm going to divide this up into vertical panels to kind of make it look more like a fence. And to do that, I'm going to use this 3/8 inch angle brush. I found the angle brush helpful for this step for creating thin vertical lines. You can also do this with a round brush or any flat brush. But basically, I'm kind of watering down this sort of like dark gray. You could use pure black, but I didn't want to use pure black. I wanted kind of like a lighter version. So I made a really dark gray, and this might depend on your background too. You might end up having to use black just so it can stand out better. I'm just going to take a ruler and take my brush and create these vertical lines to create the fence panels. And so the one on the left was smaller, but I'm going to make these ones about the same distance. It doesn't have to be, I'm not actually measuring this, so I'm just kind of loosely spacing these apart. I'm just doing a vertical line. I'm using the ruler. That part right there was a little bit wet, so I had to go over it a couple times for it to show up, to paint those lines, lining my ruler up so that it's perpendicular, so my lines don't go slanted. And so we have our fence. Not all the lines are the same in darkness, and that's okay. Gives it more of that rustic look. And then what we can do is we can take a round brush. So we can use like any brush. I'm going to use a number 4 round brush, and we can paint some texture on our wood fence. So this is the number 4 round brush. And I'm just taking whatever's left on my palette, mixing black into it. So again, sort of that dark gray that we used in the fence panels, the vertical lines. And I'm just going to paint little notches in the wood, little knots, little vertical marks to give it some wood texture. And you really don't have to go into a lot of detail with this, especially knowing that a lot of this might be covered up by what's on the ground in this. I'm doing it mostly towards the top area. Can make a little notch on the edge right here. This might end up being covered by a football or a pumpkin, but that's okay. So we still have a very simple texture, simple wooden fence for our background. When you're done with the background, you want to let everything dry before going on to this step. We're going to use a regular white piece of chalk to draw the 2 pumpkins and the football. So I have a dry background, and I'm using just a regular white piece of chalk. I'm going to start with the pumpkin on the left. So this is our larger pumpkin. And when I draw these pumpkins, I like to start in the center with our center oval shape. This is just a narrow, long oval that gets cut off at the very bottom of the canvas. We don't see the curve on the bottom, but it's larger than half the canvas. And then each side of that gets a curved line that starts at the top as a curve and then dragging down to create the pumpkin shape. So I did 2 more bumps on each side of the first oval, and then the stem starts at the top. I love making twisty pumpkin stems, but you're welcome to change the design of this. This one loops around and then goes off the canvas. And then we have that shape of the stem. So very simple, stylized pumpkin shape. And then we can do the little pumpkin on the lower right. So same exact drawing, only this one is a lot smaller. So starting with that center oval, and then I did 1 bump on each side, and I'll add another one. So you start at the top and you just curve downwards. And then the same style of stem starts at the very top, and that's going to curve. And then next I'm going to draw the football. So let's start by drawing a diagonal line for the center of our football. So this guy, this object, is going to overlap our pumpkin on the left, and be behind the pumpkin on the right. But for now, we're just going to make it overlap everything so we can get that shape in. So diagonal line. And then we can draw a curve on both sides of that line. It's a little tricky because this football is, I don't see the bottom of it, so it's also kind of going off the canvas. It's going to be nestled in the grass. I did several of these curved lines until I achieved the shape that I was going for. So I'm just redoing those lines until I get that shape of the football. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll look very similar to a football shape. And then this guy over here, it's a little tricky. This one's going to be overlapping, so I can redo that and make sure that it's overlapping in the right areas. I might have to move that if I need to. This pumpkin over here, make sure that the parts that I want to see are still visible with the way I drew the football. So when I'm happy with the composition, I can go ahead and start painting. So I decided to paint the football first, knowing that some of this is going to be overlapping, but that's okay. We can still paint this first and go back over what we need to. So this is the color Raw Umber and Burnt Sienna. I used both of these browns for this. One brown is like a cool dark brown. The other one's kind of a reddish brown. We're going to start with the Raw Umber and our 3/4 flat brush. And I'm going to use this brush to get that shape established. So I can use the tip of the brush to do the outline of the shape. And then I can use the full width of the brush to fill it in solid. So don't worry about overlapping right now. Don't worry that it's covering the pumpkin, that we want that pumpkin to go over it. We can always go over and paint later. We're painting the football as if it's in the front right now. So again, using that tip, really establish your shape. Sometimes it helps if you hold your canvas at an angle so you can really get in there, get that shape established. So once you cover your first layer of the football with that dark brown, go back with your reddish brown and apply a layer of reddish brown. So this will blend, and that's okay. And you want to establish kind of the direction of the strokes with this football. So they're contouring strokes, and we want to try to make it look a little bit three-dimensional. So our strokes are curved on the right and curved opposite direction on the left, and kind of go straight diagonally in the center. So see how I applied that reddish brown, but I didn't over blend it. So you have the streaks of that different color in there. I'm going to take this a step further and add titanium white to my palette and add a little bit of white in there. So I'm going to take that white without rinsing the brush. Just a little bit of white on your brush is needed. And I'm going to take that and do that curved thing again on the right side. That's almost straight in the center, and then curve the opposite direction on the left. And that white is going to give our football a little bit more highlight. We can add more highlights to this later because this is super saturated and it's just blending, and that's kind of what we want. But you can see what's happening here. Just adding that little bit of white in there and making sure to pay attention to the direction of that stroke. It's going to give your football a little bit three-dimensional look. Just going to softly go over there to kind of blend that white in a little bit, but trying not to over blend it. I have pieces of chalk that can kind of brush over that. The chalk will also wipe off after the paint dries. So if you have little pieces of chalk kind of scattered on your paint, that's fine. Let's rinse our brush and introduce a little bit of black into this. So we did the highlight thing. Let's add a little bit of shadowing into our football, specifically towards the bottom. So I'm going to wipe or completely rinse my brush off this time, wipe it off, and grab some black. I'm just going to water that black down just slightly and add a little bit of brown into it. That's that raw umber color, that dark cool brown. So I mixed black with the dark cool brown. So it's not super pitch dark black, but it's got a little bit of brown in there that'll help it blend a little bit better. I'm only doing this on the left side. This is where it might be a little bit more shadowy because it's laying against a pumpkin. And I'm just taking that and gently curving that towards the left, using the tip of the brush to help define that shape and just letting that blend, paying attention to the direction of the curves, the strokes. And that is it for now for this football. Let's let that all dry before we add any of the stitching or the white lines on it. So let's go ahead and rinse the brush off and let's do our pumpkin on the left. Our pumpkin, by the way, you're welcome to change the colors of these pumpkins. So if you want to do like a team color for each of the pumpkins, if that sounds fun, you could do it that way. This is Cad Orange Hue that I'm loading on my palette because I'm just going to do an orange pumpkin on the left and a turquoise pumpkin on the right. Those are just the colors that I chose. And I'll be using the 3/4 flat brush. If you find that the 3/4 flat is too big for this, you can switch to the 12 bright. That's that smaller flat brush. Instead of using the big flat brush, I'm actually going to use that brush instead. This is the 12 bright brush. It's like a 1/2 inch flat brush. And we have Cad Orange Hue and Titanium White on our palette. So a lot of times with these pumpkins, I end up adding white into the orange to give coverage because orange tends to be a see-through color. So that's what I'm doing here. So I'm double loading my brush in orange and white, and I'm starting with the center oval and basically painting the entire oval that color. And I'm mostly painting by stroking down. So just like what we did with the football where we changed the direction of the curves, it's kind of the same thing with these pumpkins. So you want to make sure that you're curving and contouring in the direction of that shape. So when you're done with the oval and you do the pumpkin bumps on each side, you want to try to kind of change this color. So for this one, I added a little bit more white and I'm stroking down in the direction of that shape. So most of these strokes are starting from the top of the pumpkin curve and it's curving downwards. So we have it's a little tricky over here where our football is overlapping. If you need to paint orange over the football just to get that done, you can, and then go back and fix your football. If you want, you can have the big pumpkin overlap in front of the football, but I'm just doing my best to kind of go around it. There's some orange that ended up going over it, and that's okay. We can always touch that up later. That same kind of thing. Going around that and then stroking down. It is also a little bit tricky towards the bottom because part of that pumpkin on the bottom is just kind of cut off and we don't see it. We still kind of have to, like right here, I still have to kind of curve those strokes and also go around that football at the same time. But almost all of these strokes are created by starting at the top and stroking downwards, and that's how we create that pumpkin texture. And you can see how that orange and white are sort of blending on the canvas. For each of the pumpkin bumps, I am kind of altering that color, using that white to kind of change that color so it's dark and light. You can add a little bit of white in there to give it some streaks of white without over blending it. I'm going to go back on the top and just kind of defining those bumps a little bit better at the top. What we can also do is add some dark into our pumpkin color by mixing a little bit of orange with the burnt sienna. That's that reddish brown color, or the raw umber. Either of those browns would work. But what I'm going to do is take my orange on my palette. Without rinsing the brush, I'm going to grab some of that burnt sienna. You can grab the raw umber too, so any of the browns would work. Mixing with the orange just to get that orange a little bit darker. And I'm just going to use the tip of the brush, and I'm going to stroke downwards. And I'm using the tip of the brush to paint the lines of the pumpkin. So these are the lines that are in between each of those bumps that we drew and painted. So that darker orange is used to get those to stand out. That's especially helpful if when you painted it, all the orange ended up being the same color throughout. Sometimes that happens, but we can take that darker color and help to make those stand out a little bit better. I'm taking that brown orange, and I'm also kind of dragging it upwards towards the bottom. It's a little bit shadowy at the bottom. So just use the full width of the brush and just kind of drag up in the same direction of the curve. So we have a little bit of shadowing towards the bottom of the pumpkin now. Let's do the opposite. Let's do a little bit of highlighting towards the top of the pumpkin. So I'm going to rinse my brush off and grab the white. So now this might be too strong, so just a little bit and see what happens, like a dry brush style. So I'm just kind of starting at the top of each of these and just kind of curving down in that specific direction that it's curving down at. If that's too bright, you can go back with orange to kind of mellow that out a little bit. So we still have some lighter color streaks towards the top. So next I'm going to create the stem of this pumpkin. So let's switch to a number 4 round brush for this. Because this is like a curvy shape, the round brush is a lot easier to work with. And load the round brush in water and grab your raw umber, so your darker brown. If you want, you can grab the other brown that's on your palette too. We want to start by just establishing this shape. You can even add a little bit of black to it to kind of make sure it's nice and dark. But I am using the brush to sketch out how I want this stem to look. So it's going to start, so it's like wide at the top and it gathers together very quickly. I'm actually going to stop right here real quick, right there. Add another pumpkin bump right there and down here, so that our stem can be kind of symmetrical towards the top, if that makes sense. And then it's going to twist to the left and then quickly twist to the right, and it's going to curl. When I'm doing these round brush swirly things, sometimes it helps to little bit of water on the brush to help get that to flow better, so it can go in the direction that you want it to. And a little bit of black going back in there with that black to kind of darken the left side of that stem. So it's a little bit shadowy already on the left side. And I can grab a little bit of the white. So I'm doing this right now before that brown dries all the way, because I want that white to already start blending on the canvas here. So just on the right side of this stem, I'm going to do these little like short strokes that curve and blend with my brown, but don't overblend, and you can see how it creates that really beautiful pumpkin stem texture. That little bit of white. Can go back with the black and shadow it right here. This stem is going to change to green as it twists, but I don't have green on my palette yet, so I'm just going to kind of stop that brown right there. And later on, when I introduce green, I can continue that stem on the other side. You can see how using that black and the white into the brown and letting it blend together creates that beautiful texture, that twisty pumpkin stem texture. Next, I'm going to rinse and fix the parts of the football where I may have overlapped some of that orange. This should be an easy fix because there wasn't a whole lot that overlapped, but I'm going to grab black, and any of those browns are fine, just the same color of whatever this is right here, that shadowy area. I'm just going to go back and make sure none of that orange is overlapping. There's a little bit of overlapping that happened down here, so I'm just going to go and fix that part as well. Let's rinse our foreground off and let's load our palette with the turquoise or whatever color you're doing the little pumpkin on the right. And this was done with the exact same technique. So you'll need your color plus the color white plus a color for shadowing if you end up needing to do some shadowing in this. So this turquoise color is actually a very opaque color, so I don't need to use a lot of white for it to show up, but I am still going to use the white to kind of make this kind of a two-toned color and not solid the same color. So starting with the center bump, painted the center oval and add a little bit of white in there, kind of stroke that down to already give that pumpkin some texture and some color variation. And then each of the bumps curving downwards. I am still using the number 4 round brush for this, by the way, because this is a smaller pumpkin. The round brush made more sense because it's a smaller brush. So with each of the pumpkin bumps, I am changing that color so that each of them stand out. So I'm using that white and blending white with turquoise to make different color variations. It's almost like I'm doing a pattern of dark light for each of the pumpkin curves. I'm just stroking in a curved direction from the top to the bottom, and this little pumpkin is overlapping our football, so it should be able to paint over. If you're doing this pumpkin in a different color, for example, yellow or orange tend to be see-through colors, you might want to make sure you're adding a little bit more white to it, or paint the pumpkin white first and then go back over it. That way it will cover up your dark football area. If you need to go back and paint the lines to help with the pumpkin texture, you can mix brown with turquoise or whatever color you're using, just mix brown into it. Any of the browns are fine. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to rinse my brush off, grab some brown, and mix that with turquoise. That's going to darken my turquoise. So starting at the top, I'm going to stroke down. So these are all the in-between lines. This is going to help your pumpkin shape stand out a little bit better. So start each of them at the top, stroke downwards. You can go back and finish those lines. And then next I can do the stem. I'm going to do the stem using the exact same technique that I used in our larger pumpkin, only this time it's going to be smaller. So this is raw umber that I'm loading onto my palette. The number 4 round brush, a little bit of water in there. I can darken it with some black to make sure this is really dark. We have a little bit of a conflict here because of our football. So I'm going to change the direction of the stem because I don't want my stem to twist around and then overlap the football where it's the exact same color. So I made this twist towards the right instead of the left. And I can, before it dries, I can use little bits of white to do my little texture thing on one side. I like to erase my chalk lines sometimes to kind of clean my painting up before the painting's done all the way. You just want to be really careful if any of this is still wet to not end up smearing the paint. But for the most part, my football is dry by now. So I'm going to get rid of all those little chalk pieces, chalk residue. Right here, I just did the stem, so I'm going to be really careful not to smear any of this paint. But cleaning up the chalk lines really helps kind of clean up the painting, and you can see if there's anything else you need to touch up now that the chalk lines are gone. And next I'm going to work on the details in the football. I found this part of the painting to be tricky. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I don't paint footballs all the time, but I had a little bit of struggle with the stripes and the stitching. So I recommend drawing it out with a piece of chalk first. That way you can erase your chalk and adjust it as needed. But the two curvy lines, so there's one curve at the top, one at the bottom. It might just be the weird angle that the football is on or because it's overlapping. But I did end up adjusting these a bit. Brought this one down just a little bit more. So you can use your piece of chalk until you get the placement of your lines the way you want them. I ended up erasing this top one and redoing that one too. So when you have that placement, you can do your little stitching. So you can do the stitching right down the middle, or you can kind of make it more towards the right. You can kind of play around with that how you want it to look. But the stitches are curves, and they curve the opposite direction from each other. So I didn't really make them super fancy, but I just kind of quickly sketched them out with my chalk. And I'm going to use a 3/8 inch angle brush. The angle brush I found helpful here because I can angle it and get that curved line that I wanted using solid titanium white. So I'm just basically painting in both of those curves, solid white. So you want to go over this perhaps with a couple coats of paint to make sure it is very solid. None of that dark brown color should be showing through. Take your time with this. Then I'll do the bottom curve. So it gets a little tricky here because of our little pumpkin down here that's overlapping the fact that the edge of the football is off the edge of the canvas. The good news is that we can paint grass, or we will be painting grass in this bottom area. So if there's anything down here that looks weird, you can kind of disguise that later with little grass blades that are covering it. So that's also going curved. And you can, so if you painted over the blue pumpkin, you can go back and redo anything real quick. And also we'll be able to erase any leftover chalk lines after that. So I will warn you, the stitching is a little tricky. And what I decided to do was erase this. I'm gonna go back over it with a white paint pen. I chose to go back over it with the white paint pen because the paint pen's a little bit more precise, and I can really kind of draw out where exactly I want the stitch line to be so I can make it look a little bit more even. So I drew that center stitch line pretty much right down the middle of the football, but do you see how that line kind of curves a little bit? It's not exactly perfectly straight. It's a line that's going diagonally, but it curves. And each of our little stitch lines, so this is a white Posca paint pen, by the way. You can see how it's not like super bright and opaque, but it does allow me to have more control over my stitch lines. And I'm going to paint this over with white paint after I'm done drawing it out. So each of the stitch lines go the opposite direction. So these ones over here curve one way, and the ones down here curve the other way. So, and then the ones in the middle start going straight. So that's how we create that stitching, give it some depth. You can go back, make that a little bit thicker. But again, I'm going to go back over this with a regular paintbrush and white paint, because these white paint pens are, for me, they never end up being very opaque for me. If you are drying this out and you mess up, baby wipes will erase this. As long as the paint pen doesn't dry, paint pens dry pretty fast, but as long as it doesn't dry, you'll be able to erase it really quick with like a baby wipe and redo it. Another thing that could work is like a white chalk pencil. Those will erase with like a regular eraser until you get the stitching that you want. And then we can go back over what we just drew with our number 4 round brush and titanium white. I'm kind of twisting that brush to get that paint right there and those bristles kind of gathered. So I'm just going to paint what I just drew with the paint pen, starting with that center line. And then I will paint each of the stitches so they're going curved this way on this side of the football, and then they go kind of straight when we get to the center, and then they start curving the opposite direction on the bottom part. I'm going to go back over some of these stitches to make them a little bit thicker. And then I'm going to load my palette with Mars Black and add a little bit of, I'll show you what I mean. So where the stitching goes into the football, I'm going to do a little bit of shadow right there. So take the black, and on the ends of the stitch pieces, I'm just going to do like a little curved black mark right there on the edge. Gives it that little bit of shadow. So doing that on each of the stitch marks. So that gives it a little bit more of a 3D look. And this left side of the pumpkin also gets a little outline too, I decided, that black. So what we're going to do next is introduce green to our palette so we can add the green leaves and part of the pumpkin vine that's on the left pumpkin. So I'm going to load the color Hooker's Green Hue Permanent onto my palette, and you'll need titanium white to mix with this color as well. Rinse my number 4 round brush off, and then on my palette I'm going to mix white and green together about equal amounts. You may have to make this darker depending on your background colors. So for example, if your background color is light, you might have to add more dark. If it's dark, you might have to add more light. I started by painting the center line of the leaf, and then I'm just going to drag my paint strokes outwards to form a very simple leaf shape. And that's our little leaf. It kind of overlaps our football. And then this one over here is actually twisting with our dark brown color. The green, the brown turns to green and it twists and then it goes off the edge of the canvas. The brown in that stem is definitely dry by now, so it's not going to blend with it, but I could still paint that green over it. See how I kind of overlapped part of that? And then I can do little leaves, simple pumpkin leaves. So you can start by painting a center line and then dragging little curved strokes outwards to form a simple leaf shape. This next step, I am going to be painting grass in the bottom area. So this is the part where we could disguise whatever it is that we want to disguise at the bottom. Our awkward shaped football, pumpkins that overlapping weirdly. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the green and the white. I'm using the number 4 round brush, and I'm just starting at the bottom and stroking upwards to create each little grass blade, and I'm changing the direction of the stroke. So some of these, they're kind of curving and slanting one way. Some of these are curving and slanting the other way. You're creating variation in color by using that white, letting that white just kind of blend with some of the green on the canvas. You're also kind of changing the height. So over here in this pumpkin area, most of these grass blades are pretty short and don't go all the way across. I left the middle part of that pumpkin open with not a lot of grass blades. But right here where there's kind of a gap between the football and the pumpkin, I made those grass blades a little bit taller. So right here, taller, but also it kind of disguises parts of the bottom of the football. Down here, the grass blades are a little bit shorter. Down here as well, a little bit shorter. You can use that white to create contrast in your grass. So as I'm reloading, I'm grabbing different amounts of white and green, letting that blend together. Very short grass blades over here in the bottom of this pumpkin. So you can see how the grass kind of varies throughout the bottom of the canvas. Much taller right here where that gap is. The next thing I am going to do after I'm done with my little grass blades is go back and add some highlight to the football, specifically towards the top. I'm going to do this with the dry brush technique. So I'm going to load my palette with titanium white and use a 12 bright brush for this. So this is that 1/2 inch flat brush. Load that into the white, and with a towel, I'm going to wipe some of that paint off because I only want a little bit of paint on this brush. So I wiped it off, and I'm going to do a curved dry brush line. So see how that's not like a solid white color? It shouldn't be as bright as the lines that we painted on the football. It's very translucent. Then I loaded my paintbrush with just a little bit more white. I'm going to add a line that's kind of more solid, but still not as bright. That was more towards the far right of this. And if you feel like adding some more dry brush strokes like down here, you can just be very careful not to kind of overdo it. My bristles are kind of spread apart weirdly right now. That gives the football a little bit more character. I'm actually going to go back over that with some dark, kind of dim that down a little bit more. If you want, you can add a little bit of shadowing to your lines of the football. Just be really careful not to let that black overpower it. So I only have a little bit on my brush. I'm just very gently kind of dragging it upwards just on the far left part. This side. So see how, oops, a little bit too dark right there. We can wipe that off and kind of blend that out, or we can always go back with some more white to kind of brighten that. It's a rustic football, and I'm going to add just one little bit of white over here, very thin line to brighten that up just a bit more. And then I'm going to go back over here, redo some of my grass blades down here. Next, I'm going to do a little bit of outlining with the black for my pumpkin on the left. Very, very small amount of black on the tip of the brush, just at the top, a little bit at the bottom. Kind of get those lines a little bit outlined. The next thing I'm going to do is the lettering. So I am going to write hello fall. You're welcome to change the lettering of this if you wanted to say hello football or fall and football y'all or something along those lines. You're definitely welcome, but I'm going to just keep it simple and say hello fall. And I like to kind of look up fonts. So if you type into Google Images, type in hello fall and then font, it gives you some pretty cursive ideas. So I'm looking at something right now that has cursive that kind of looks like this. So I'm doing this with that white paint pen. It's not super noticeable, but it's enough to where I can see it. If I like it, if I don't like it, I can get a baby wipe and erase that real quick and redo it to how I like it. It's just a little bit easier to do it that way instead of the chalk. And then I can get my number 4 round brush and go back over that with the paint and the brush. The tricky thing right here might be the contrast. So if your background is super light in this area, that white may not be enough for it to stand out. So you can change the color to black or even a different color for that to stand out better. For the most part, the white showed up in this area. This lettering takes quite a bit of time to do, so take your time doing it. I am going to go silent here while I finish this step. I did end up having some paint pen still showing, but I was able to erase that later with a wet baby wipe. That actually did end up coming off. So if that happened to you too, that's something that you can consider doing. And what I'm going to do next is paint the little fall leaves. So I almost loaded some yellow on my palette here, but I decided to just stick with the same orange and not introduce any new colors. So I'm using orange and white, and I'm doing very simple leaves, so like the rounded and pointed leaves. If you want to do more of an oak leaf, you could start by painting like the center line and then the little curved shape areas on each side of the leaf. Another rounded and pointed leaf. So you can do as many leaves as you want. I'll do one more in the upper right corner, so center line, and then you're just doing these little curved shape pieces going outwards from the center. If you want to highlight your leaves or make that color look a little bit more interesting, you can grab a little bit of white and just kind of paint a little bit of white on one side of all of your leaves. Let that blend with the orange. And then next I'm going to do the little stem of the leaves. So I did the stem with black, but I'm not sure if this is too dark. So if you don't like how dark that black is, you can do this same thing that I'm doing, but with brown, or you can make like a dark orange color. But basically doing like a line down the center of the leaf or just on the edge, you can decide which way you like better. And then I made like a little notch on the edge of the stem. And then if you want to go into more detail and paint the little veins on the leaves, you can. So these are just little diagonal lines that are going outwards from the center line of the leaf. And if you want, you can add your little lines on our pumpkin leaves. So a little line down the middle, and then kind of loosely added some black to this part of the vine. Helps that to stand out just a little bit better. And that is it. This is the conclusion of how to paint Hello Fall football scene. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.